Welcome to this special edition of the New Stack Makers on the Road. We're here at the Open Source Summit in Dublin, Ireland. Discussions from the show floor with technologists giving you their expertise and insights to help you with your everyday work. Amazon Web Services is the world's most comprehensive and broadly adopted cloud platform, offering over 175 fully featured services from data centers globally. Millions of customers trust AWS to power their infrastructure, become more agile, and lower costs.
Hello, and welcome to an on-the-road episode of the New Stack Makers podcast. I'm Heather Joslin, features editor of the New Stack, and we're here in beautiful downtown Dublin, Ireland, and for the Open Source Summit Europe. And I'm here with Dawn Foster, and we're going to talk about open source, how to maintain open source sustainability in open source projects, basically. So Dawn, you want to care to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Dawn Foster. I am Director of Open Source Community Strategy at VMware, which is under our Open Source Program Office. And that includes a lot of different things. So part of that is measuring the health of some of our open source projects. So I'm also involved in the CHAOSS project. I'm on the governing board for CHAOSS, which is an open source project health analytics project. So that ties in nicely with my work at VMware because we are focused on making sure that our open source projects are healthy. The other thing that I'm focused on is really helping us improve how we engage in open source projects so that they are sustainable over the long term, which kind of ties into my work with the CNCF Contributor Strategy Technical Advisory Group. So I'm co-chair of that, and our remit is really to help CNCF projects be sustainable, grow, well-maintained, and healthy projects.
Terrific, and thank you for joining us today. Let's start with a definition of sustainability in terms of open source projects. What do you consider a sustainable open source project? What are some of the challenges to sustaining it for maintainers?
I think the first challenge is the word sustainability, because sometimes it gets interpreted as sustainability in the sense of environmental sustainability, which isn't what we're talking about today. So the first thing to do is clarify what we mean by sustainability. And so from the standpoint that we're talking about today, it really is about making sure that your projects are successful over the long term. And it's something that's challenging for maintainers. In particular, maintainers of smaller projects where they might be the only maintainer. And it's something that's important. A lot of people pick up open source projects and use them in their products and in their companies without really thinking about whether or not that project is likely to be successful over the long term. And there are some different things you can look at with respect to that. So one of the things that I, in particular, like to look at when it comes to sustainability, it's basically kind of a contributor metric. Sometimes it's called the bus factor. Sometimes it's called the lottery winner or something like that. But it's basically if one of your key maintainers for a project won the lottery, retired on a beach tomorrow, could the project continue to be successful? And if you have enough maintainers and you have the work spread out over enough people, then yes. But if you're a single maintainer project and that maintainer retires, there might not be anybody left to pick it up. So that's one of the key things I look at when I'm thinking about whether a project's sustainable over the long term.
And that obviously the danger of a project not being maintained over the long term is that it becomes vulnerable, and obviously companies and organizations use a lot. Nearly all of them use some open source.
Yeah, it's a huge issue, and it's something that we're pretty proactive with actually at VMware. So projects that are no longer maintained, that are, everybody ends up with some abandoned projects. We take a really proactive approach to archiving those. And we also archive projects that don't continue to update their security vulnerabilities. So we don't want people using open source projects that are vulnerable. And this, of course, isn't just, VMware's problem. It, happens with CNCF projects. It happens with everybody's projects. And you really need to make sure that there are people who can actually make fixes, especially around security vulnerabilities, and then get those fixes released into the next version of the project.
Some people have said, especially in the wake of the Log4j vulnerabilities that happened late last year, that one way to ensure that open source projects continue to be maintained is to pay the maintainers. What is your take on that?
Yeah, it's a big plus one for me. I think it's really important to pay people who work on open source. I'm paid to do the work that I do in open source projects. VMware pays that as part of my salary. A lot of projects like Linux and Kubernetes, a lot of the people who contribute are paid to do so, which is very different than it was 20 years ago in open source when I first started. And really, if the people that are being paid to do it are going to have a lot more time to devote to these open source projects. So they're going to tend to be a little bit more reliable, just because they're going to have a certain number of certain amount of time that's devoted to contributing to these projects, assuming that the companies continue to do that. But I think I'm a fan of a lot of the work that the Linux Foundation has done to pay some maintainers and put things under foundations and make sure that projects are well looked after. I think that's important. I think the other side effect of paying people to contribute to open source is that you get more diverse open source contributors. Because by paying people salaries to do this work in open source, you get people who wouldn't naturally have time to do that. So in a lot of cases, this is women who have extra childcare responsibilities. This is people from underrepresented backgrounds who have other commitments outside of work. But by allowing them to do that within their work time, you not only get healthier, longer sustaining open source projects, you get more diverse contributions.
What role do you think the open source community of contributors in particular can play toward making these projects more sustainable?
Yeah, so there are a lot of things that projects can do. My most recent bandwagon that I jump up and down on is making sure that you have really good documentation and onboarding processes for contributors. So if people don't know how to build your software or how to get a development environment up and running, they're not going to be able to contribute to the project. So making it as easy as you possibly can through, there are some tools you can use to give people development environments so they don't have to spin one up on their own. There's better contributor documentation, which says these are the steps you need to do to get a development environment up and running. Here are the tests you need to run. Here's the whole process. And if you don't have that documented, it's really hard to get anyone to contribute at all anyways. And then the other thing that I think a lot of projects are starting to take advantage of, but should take more advantage of, is, mentoring programs. So if you look at Outreachy is a fantastic one. Google Summer of Code, Google Summer of Docs. There are lots of, CNCF has some mentoring programs as well. But pulling new people into the project and paying them through a mentorship and bringing more people on board, I think can help a lot. And that's one of the areas that maintainers tend to fall down on, because it's hard to take if you're already a busy, overworked maintainer, it is really hard to take then more time to teach someone else how to do it. And it really pays off in the long run. Yeah. But it's hard in the short term for maintainers to take that time aside to mentor and bring up new contributors.
And it seems like to some degree it's kind of a management issue too. It's like it's can take more time to coach or to mentor, but in the long run it pays off than just doing and then just.
Yeah, exactly. It's short-term cost for a long-term benefit, really.
Yeah. What can companies do, and what does VMware do to help sort of inspire a culture of contributing upstream to open source projects?
Yeah, so we have a few different programs within VMware that help with this. We run some regular meetups internally within VMware that are more educational. So we try to help people understand what they need to do to contribute upstream, or what they can do to be a better maintainer for the VMware originated open source projects. So we have meetups with some best practices around that. We also have really extensive open source guidelines, which are really around, these are the things that you can do to make your contributions better. These are the processes we have at VMware. And it's really focused on trying to make sure that when VMware contributes to these open source projects, that we're doing so as a good corporate citizen and that we're doing this in the right way. So anything we can do just to provide educational materials within our company is worth it.
Can you tell me about the Chaos Project?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Chaos Project is one of my favorite projects.
Oh, great.
It is also one of the most newcomer-friendly projects. Yeah, we get a lot of new contributors through the Chaos Project. But Chaos itself, it's a community health analytics for open source projects. That's where the Chaos comes from. And we're focused on developing metrics around project health. So metrics that help you understand where your project is healthy and where it isn't, so that you can decide what changes you need to make within your project to make it better. And the reason that the Chaos Project in particular is so friendly to newcomers is we spend a lot of time just defining metrics, which means working in a Google Doc and thinking about all of the different ways you might possibly measure something like, are you getting a diverse set of contributors into your project from different organizations, for example? So we have an organizational diversity metric. We also have a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion metrics. So how do you measure whether your event is diverse? And we also do DEI badging. So events can apply to get a DEI badge for their event. That we run through a whole process about whether or not their event meets our diversity, equity, and inclusion guidelines.
Would this be on the user to use those metrics themselves, or would it be a situation where those metrics are, how a project rates, for example, or an event rates would be, easily accessible to the public? Like if you had a GitHub project, would you be able to go to that GitHub project and see, and as a potential contributor, and see how it rates in terms of
so we don't necessarily rate projects because we
Okay.
don't like to compare them against each other. But we do have tooling. So there are a couple of tools. There's one called Augur and one called Grimoire Lab that are under the Chaos Project.
Okay.
And then there are loads of other tools. So like CNCF has DevStats, which is a CNCF project. It's nothing to do with Chaos, but it measures a lot of the same things as the Chaos tools. And they spin up those dashboards for all CNCF projects.
Okay.
So anybody can go out and they can look at some of these dashboards. So if somebody has spun up a dashboard, whether it's using Chaos tools or somebody else's tools, then anybody can see, various aspects of that project's health.
What are some of the new initiatives in addition to Chaos that you see that to help foster open source sustainability that you'd like to draw attention to?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think some of the new mentoring initiatives within the CNCF are one way to improve sustainability. So I talked about this a little bit earlier, but it falls under the CNCF tag contributor strategy that I'm involved in, and so we just spun up a whole new metrics working group. A mentoring working group.
Okay.
And we're looking at new ways to get people involved. And one of the things that group's doing, they have some people in New Zealand who are working with some indigenous communities and trying to get more women from indigenous communities involved in CNCF projects through the mentoring program.
Okay.
So they're doing some really interesting things with the idea that wouldn't just be in New Zealand, that we could, maybe replicate that into other underrepresented communities across the world. So I think that's one thing to look at. And I think you can look at also some of the initiatives coming out of Africa. So like She Codes Africa and some of those initiatives to try and get more people involved in open source projects. I think that's kind of the new and interesting thing for sustainability of projects, is really getting people from these underrepresented backgrounds and mentoring them and giving them opportunities within these projects.
And obviously, also that's to some degree contributing to open source is a pipeline of, creates a pipeline of talent as well for hiring companies that want to hire organizations that need additional tech talent.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What are some other? I mean, just to dream a little bit, what are some other ideas that you'd like to see get more traction in this area, in this space of open source sustainability?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, one of the things that I worry a lot about right now is maintainer burnout. So, we have things like Maintainer Circle that we run out of, again, tag contributor strategy for the CNCF. And it really is, it acts kind of as a support group for maintainers. And so it's just maintainers talking to other maintainers about ways to improve their, the success of their projects. But I really think that we need to do more to address maintainer burnout, and it's something it's really hard to do for open source projects because, any random person can file issues and bug maintainers all day in ways that are not productive, and we end up with maintainer burnout, and we also end up with maintainer burnout because we just don't have enough maintainers. So I think really kind of this pipeline of getting new people into these projects and participating in ways that is eventually reducing the load on these horribly overworked maintainers is a good thing.
Do you think the pandemic had an effect on maintainer or burnout in general? Did it make it worse? Did it did it ease the burden on people or?
It depends, actually.
Okay.
So at the beginning,
That's an engineer answer.
at the beginning of the pandemic, we saw a big uptick in open source because all of a sudden people just had all of this time on their hands and they did not know what to do with it. Now, over time, and the reason I say it depends is because it actually fragmented. So Josh Burkus he did some research on this, and it was a little bit anecdotal, a little bit based on CNCF dev stats. But what he found was that there was kind of a tipping point at which people who did not have kids and a lot of family responsibilities at home continued to sustain this higher level. And people who had kids who are now like homeschooling them from home, there were all these additional responsibilities that they hadn't had before. Their contributions to open source tended to go down. So it really tended to have a bit of a split based on whether or not you had whether or not you had kids at home, family commitments, things like that.
It's interesting. Anything else we should cover on this topic that you would like people to know if they're a maintainer or they are thinking about, would like to contribute more?
Oh, that's a good question. I would encourage people to contribute to open source projects if they're not already. I think it's fun. I mean, the projects that I contribute to I do it because I like it. It's also part of my job, but Chaos is a fun project to contribute to. Some of the CNCF projects are fun, like Kubernetes has a whole contributor strategy group that you can get involved in. And that's a great way to get in inroads into contributing. So even if you're not writing any code, you're not doing anything super technical, you can still get involved in helping the contributor experience for everybody by contributing to some of these, like this contributor experience group. And then within the CNCF, we have tag contributor strategy. So we've got loads of resources for maintainers that are published on the website, but people can also get involved. They can come to our meetings, they can help other people, they can come talk to us. So I would encourage people to use the resources that are out there to talk to other maintainers and know that they're not alone. And then if they're not already involved as a contributor, to get involved so that we can increase this pipeline of new contributors into open source projects.
Great. And also help with documentation.
Writing documentation is a fabulous way to get involved in open source projects.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us today, Dawn. We've been joined today by Dawn Foster of VMware's Open Source Program Office, and I just wanted to say thank you for joining us today on this on-the-road edition of the New Stack Makers, and we'll see you soon.
If you like this video, please give us a thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more videos like this, you can always subscribe to our YouTube channel. We're on all the major social media platforms. You can always find us at thenewstack.io. We hope to see you soon.